Welcome to India's best kept secret.
It's 7:30 in the evening across India. I am Tanvi Taneja. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. Joining me from Washington, D.C. shortly will be my colleague Kate Fisher. Up first, let's take a look at the headlines. Egypt's Abdel Fattah al-Sissi bags a third term as president, winning more than 89% votes in a contest overshadowed by the conflict in Gaza and a domestic economic crisis. UN Security Council to vote on Gaza ceasefire today. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin meets Israeli Defense Minister in Tel Aviv. Austin to announce a new marine protection force in the Red Sea. Former U.S. President and Republican Donald Trump plans the largest deportation in American history if re-elected in 2024. Adds would install loyalists to reshape U.S. foreign policy on China, NATO and Ukraine.
The unprecedented millions of Biden illegal aliens who are invading our country. It is only common sense that when I'm re-elected, we will begin, and we have no choice, the largest deportation operation in American history.
And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurates the world's largest meditation center in Varanasi, flags off a second Vande Bharat Express train from Varanasi to New Delhi. Up first, news from West Asia. The Israeli army on Monday released videos showing its soldiers operating in Gaza. The IDF, Israeli Defense Force, showed video seeing ground troops entering buildings in Gaza and firing weapons and flying drones. The footage also showed aerial strikes targeting Hamas targets in Gaza. The video release coincides with the US-Israel talks on a transition to the next phase of the conflict. The Kerem Shalom border crossing point between Israel and Gaza opened for the first time for humanitarian aid trucks on Sunday. The crossing at the borders of Egypt, Israel and Gaza is one of the main transit points for goods in and out of Gaza. The Kerem Shalom crossing point had been closed after the 7th October attacks on Israelis by Hamas. DD India's Trent Murray reports from Tel Aviv.
Kerem Shalom, a really significant crossing because before the war, that was the main entry point for goods going in and out of the Gaza Strip, but it has been closed since October 7th. The Israelis agreeing to open it once again, and we heard in the past 24 hours from the Egyptian Red Crescent that 79 trucks were able to get through on Sunday, delivering some much needed aid. The reason this has happened, there's a little bit of background. Effectively, when that ceasefire was negotiated last month with Hamas, Israel agreed to deliver 200 trucks a day of aid, or to allow 200 trucks a day into Gaza, but they weren't able to keep that promise because all of the aid was coming through the Rafah border crossing with Egypt, and officials said that that crossing was just never built to handle that amount of traffic. So there is hope that by opening up Kerem Shalom, that will significantly increase the amount of aid coming through. But what the Israelis are also saying is that the United States has agreed to a major upgrade and a funding upgrade for Rafah border crossing. They say long-term they're going to close Kerem Shalom and all the other crossings. They don't want any more goods or people transiting through the Israeli side. They say in the long term they want everything to come through the Egyptian side once that funding upgrade happens from the United States.
Meanwhile, there are also reports that the United Nations Security Council could vote as early as today on a draft resolution to establish an aid monitoring mechanism in Gaza. The draft resolution calls for facilitating the use of all land, sea and air routes leading to the entire Gaza Strip, including border crossings such as that of Kerem Shalom. The fate of the draft Security Council resolution hinges on the final negotiations among Israel, the United States and the UAE. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is in Tel Aviv, where he held talks with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Talks were focused on trying to end the high-intensity conflict and its transition to a more limited, focused conflict. Austin has prominently supported Israel's right to defend, but he has also become increasingly vocal about the rise in civilian casualties in this conflict. Meanwhile, about 1,000 Israeli volunteers are helping Palestinian patients get medical aid at Israeli hospitals. Members of Israeli volunteer organization Road to Recovery, spearheaded by Yael Noe, are helping transport sick Palestinians in the West Bank to hospitals in Israel for medical treatment. Further east in Asia, North Korea launched a second ballistic missile in less than 12 hours on Monday. The solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile has the potential to travel more than 15,000 kilometers. Pyongyang had condemned the United States for orchestrating what it called a preview of a nuclear war with the arrival of a nuclear-powered US submarine in South Korea on Sunday. DD India's Jagriti Dave reports from Washington, D.C.
These latest indications of a launch by North Korea are expected to complicate further the attempts by the United States to denuclearize the peninsula. It suggests that North Korea is willing to double down on its threats rather than view the actions by the United States, Japan and South Korea, their cooperation, as a deterrence. And this ramping up of its missile test by Kim Jong-un is an example of that. There's added concern that North Korea could also supply weapons to Russia as part of its war with Ukraine in exchange for Russia's knowledge about nuclear technology. So these missile launches are worrying not only for the Korean Peninsula, but wider geopolitics. Now, all this comes as the United States, Japan and South Korea are about to launch a sharing system of missile data of launches by North Korea, and that's due to happen this month. And the sorts of things that they will be sharing are detecting and tracking incoming North Korean missiles. There'll be nuclear operation scenarios as part of their joint exercises. All of these which Pyongyang views as provocations, but which the United States, Japan and South Korea view as necessary parts of their attempts to denuclearize the peninsula and for the security of the trilateral agreement and their own individual nations against the threats and the challenges posed by North Korea.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the U.S. condemned North Korea's missile tests as they are a violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. On to Egypt now. Abdel Fattah al-Sissi has cruised to victory in an election that has been overshadowed by the crisis in Gaza and a domestic economic crisis as well. My colleague Kate Fisher is in Washington, D.C. She gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Kate, even though it was a contest where Sissi faced no serious challenges, but he has tough tasks on hand.
Tanvi, that's right. Abdel Fattah al-Sissi has secured a third term as Egypt's president, winning 89.6% of the vote on Monday. But he has to contend with conflict in Gaza and a domestic economic crisis. Mr. Sissi was running against 3 other candidates. The most prominent potential challenger halted his run in October. Mr. Sissi was first elected president in 2014 and was then re-elected in 2018, both times with 97% of the vote. Al-Sisi is also a former military general who has led Egypt for the past decade. Iraqis began voting on Monday in the first provincial council elections in more than a decade, amid calls for a boycott of the vote. About 6,000 candidates will be voting for 285 seats nationwide. They'll be up for those seats, according to the Independent High Electoral Commission. The vote's taking place in 15 of the 18 provinces. Serbia's President Alexander Vučić has claimed victory in a snap parliamentary election, saying that his party is heading for an absolute majority. Pollsters say the populist SNS party, led by Vučić, won 46.2% of the votes, while the opposition centre-left Serbia Against Violence Alliance is set to come second with 23.2%. The centre-left alliance accused the ruling party of election fraud and said that it would be complaining to the Election Commission. Here in the US, former President Donald Trump has said that undocumented immigrants were, quote, poisoning the blood of the country. Again, using language that's previously drawn criticism for being xenophobic, with echoes of Nazi rhetoric. Mr. Trump made these comments during a campaign event in the state of New Hampshire, where he railed against the record number of migrants attempting to cross the US border illegally.
You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country. Nobody's even looking at them. They just come in.
Frontline Ukrainian troops have scaled back some military operations as they face a shortage of artillery shells and a lack of foreign assistance. Brigadier General Alexander Tarnavsky said that the shortage of artillery shells is a very big problem and that the drop in foreign military aid is having an impact on the battlefield against Russia.
Today, there is a need among the troops. There is a problem with ammunition, especially post-Soviet cells. And today, these problems exist across the entire front line.
DD India's Megumi Lim reports now from Kyiv.
Alexander Tarnavsky, a senior Ukrainian army general, said Ukrainian troops are facing a shortage of ammunition all across the 1,000-kilometer-long front line in the east and in the south. The drop, he says, in foreign military aid has impacted operations on the battlefield. And Tarnavsky said this was a, quote, very big problem. Ukraine has begun rationing its use of artillery shells as the U.S. continues to struggle to get Congress approval for its $60 billion military aid package, and with Hungary blocking the European Union's proposed 50 billion euros in aid for Kyiv. In some parts of the southeastern front, Ukraine's troops have gone on the defensive as they continue to try to attack Russian forces in others. But Tarnavsky said that Moscow troops are also facing shortages of their own, and winter conditions have made fighting a challenge for both sides. After almost 22 months of war, the fighting has become largely attritional, and neither side has made any significant advances on the battlefield this year. Last month, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a new budget into law that would allow the country to commit 30% of its spending on the military, placing Russia's economy firmly on a wartime footing for the coming year. The U.S. has been Ukraine's biggest donor of weapons and military aid, and without Washington's help, both U.S. and Ukrainian officials have said Ukraine could very likely lose the war against Russia. Megumi Lim in Kyiv reporting for DD India.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin has dismissed the remarks made by US President Joe Biden that Russia would attack a NATO country if it wins the war against Ukraine.
I think President Biden understands that. This is simply a figure of speech used in an attempt to justify a mistaken policy on Russian axis. Russia has no reason or interest to fight the NATO countries. There is no geopolitical, economic, political or military reason to go to war with NATO countries.
The European Union has launched formal infringement proceedings against social media company X, formerly known as Twitter, which it suspects of breaching its rules in areas including countering illegal content and disinformation. The proceedings will focus on countering the dissemination of illegal content in the EU and X's suspected breach of its obligations on transparency. X said it was cooperating with the regulatory process.
Today we opened formal proceedings against X based on several suspected infringements of the Digital Services Act. The opening of proceedings means that the Commission will now investigate X's systems and policies related to certain suspected infringements. It does not prejudge the outcome of the investigation, nor does it signal that the Commission considers that X is compliant with all other obligations under the DSA. The Commission will continue monitoring X's compliance with all obligations under the DSA, and it has suspicions of other infringements. It will then take necessary steps.
Around 8 people were killed and 84 injured after an oil terminal blasted in Guinea's capital, Conakry. The explosion at the West African nation's main oil terminal rocked the Kaloum administrative district, blowing out the windows of several nearby homes and forcing hundreds of people to flee. The origin of the fire remains unknown. More than 300 people have been evacuated in what authorities expect to be Australia's worst ever flood. Military helicopters have been dispatched to help people stranded in areas cut off by the floods. Thousands of people are experiencing power outages in the northern part of Queensland. Drone footage showed extensive flooding in Cairns as heavy rain cut off several tourist towns along the Great Barrier Reef. Weather officials forecast more rain in the next couple of days. That's all from me in Washington. Back to Tanvi now in the studio in New Delhi.
Thank you, Kate. Kate Fisher joining us from Washington, D.C. and taking forward these floods and storms-related stories. India's southern state, Tamil Nadu, was lashed by torrential rainfall on Monday, causing flooding and waterlogging in several parts of the state. The India Meteorological Department has predicted heavy to very heavy rainfall over Tamil Nadu and Kerala during the next 2-3 days. Drone footage from Thoothukudi showed vehicles and buildings partially submerged in flood water after heavy rainfall. Indian Minister for Earth Sciences Kiran Rijiju announced the launch of India's first winter Arctic expedition in New Delhi. This historic venture holds immense significance as India will navigate the Arctic's critical influence on global climate, sea levels and biodiversity for the very first time. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. Kenya and the European Union have signed a long-negotiated economic partnership agreement to boost trade. And an evening dress worn by UK's late Princess Diana has sold for a whopping $1.1 million at an auction in Los Angeles.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs. With a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Next news from Varanasi. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, on the second leg of his visit to the Indian city of Varanasi, today unveiled a plaque to mark the inauguration of a newly built temple called the Swar Ved Mahamandir. The temple is dedicated to Sadguru Sadapal Dev Ji Maharaj, who is the founder of Vihangam Yoga, an Indian school of yoga and meditation. Spanning more than 300,000 square feet, the temple is the world's largest meditation center, capable of hosting 20,000 meditation practitioners. The Indian Prime Minister also laid the foundation stone and dedicated to the nation multiple development projects worth over $2 billion in Varanasi today. The projects include the inauguration of new Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay Nagar, new Bhaupur dedicated freight corridor, among various other projects. PM Modi also flagged off Varanasi to New Delhi. Vande Bharat Express train, Dorighat Memu train and a pair of long-haul goods train at the newly inaugurated dedicated freight corridor. The Indian Prime Minister also addressed the public gathering and asserted the importance of Uttar Pradesh's development for the prosperity of the nation.
जब काशी का विकास होता है तो यूपी का विकास होता है और जब यूपी का विकास होता है तो देश का विकास होता है। इसी भाव के साथ आज भी यहां करीब 20,000 करोड़ रुपए के विकास कार्यों का शिलान्यास और लोकार्पण हुआ है।
India's Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar interacted with Sri Lanka's parliamentary delegation led by Speaker Mahinda Yapa Abhivardhana. They discussed deepening of cooperation between the two countries in various sectors, including investments, tourism, projects, and people-to-people exchanges. The delegation also thanked India for its support to the Sri Lankan economy for its recovery. India's Energy Minister Hardeep Singh Puri visited Kuwait and handed over Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Draupadi Murmu's personal letters of condolences to the new Emir on the demise of Sheikh Nawaf Al Ahmad Al Jaber Al Sabah. The minister also added that India stands united in mourning with the leadership and people of Kuwait. After a long delay, the trial started of one of the most prominent pro-democracy dissidents in Hong Kong, Jimmy Lai, a 76-year-old former billionaire who started a tabloid newspaper that criticized the Communist Party and how it suppressed freedoms in Hong Kong. He's accused of sedition and endangering China's security by colluding with foreign forces, especially the United States, Britain and Canada. They've all said that Lai should be released. DD India's Andrew Wood reports from Hong Kong.
The actions of Mr. Lai during his ownership of the newspaper is one part of the charges against him, namely that he committed sedition or conspired to commit sedition through the publication of the newspaper. Now, already in the first day of the trial, the defence have come back and said that actually there's a problem here, that the charges filed against Mr. Lai were filed a few days too late beyond the deadline. So that has to be sorted out by the court. But of course, if Mr. Lai's lawyers are successful, then certainly a large chunk of the charges against him would be dropped. The other part of the charges against him relate to endangering national security. Now, a few years ago, Beijing imposed a national security law, a very strict national security law, on Hong Kong after the protests of 2019. And this basically snuffed out an awful lot of dissent very, very quickly. Under these charges, Mr. Lai is charged with collusion with foreign powers, in particular America. He's alleged to have gone to speak to American politicians and asked them to put sanctions, allegedly, on Hong Kong politicians and Hong Kong officials who've been involved in the crackdown on freedoms, democratic freedoms in Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, I'm Andrew Wood, reporting for DD India. And now we take a look at other stories making news around the world.
Pakistan's jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan used an AI-generated audio clip to call for vote in a political event. The audio played over a photograph of the former president during an internet rally of Pakistan's political party drew more than 1.4 million views on social media. Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen have stepped up attacks on vessels in the Red Sea. The attacks, targeting a route that allows east-to-west trade, especially of oil, to use the Suez Canal, have pushed some shipping companies to reroute vessels to avoid the area. Kenya and the European Union signed a long-negotiated economic agreement to increase the flow of goods between the two markets on Monday. The Economic Partnership Agreement will give Kenya duty-free and quota-free access to the EU, its biggest export market. European goods will have progressive reductions in tariff. An evening dress worn by late Princess Diana has been sold for a whopping $1.1 million. The dress was sold as part of the 4-day Hollywood Legends auction in Los Angeles. Diana first wore this black and blue ballerina-length evening dress by designer Jack Azigre in Florence in 1985. And ahead of Christmas Day next week, Santa Claus delivered a Christmas message wishing for a peaceful new year. Seated at his Arctic Circle chamber in his hometown of Rovaniemi in Finland, Santa Claus expressed his wish for people to live together in peace. He also read letters received from across the world. A man's childhood dream of having a real Christmas tree has inspired him to create a garden full of lights. This garden grows each year and now totals 5 million light bulbs at his estate in central Croatia. Over the weekend, hundreds of delighted visitors from Croatia and neighboring countries strolled through his family's vast park, adorning millions of lights on trees, bushes, wooden cottages and bridges. So with those Christmas festivities, we wind up this edition of DD India Global. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja. From my entire team in New Delhi, thank you for being with us. Namaskar.